Thank you, Lisa. I'm always getting imposter syndrome when anyone introduces me. Yeah, when people say I'm the leading thinker in the field of social mobility, my 19-year-old daughter, who's now at Glasgow University, says, "Dad, that's because you're the only professor of social mobility in the world." And I do get imposter syndrome all the time in these talks, but I'm going to talk a bit about my background. I'm not going to give you my whole story because I've only got half an hour here, right? But I'm going to tell you a little bit about my Cornish links as well. But yeah, I sort of, I always get, and is John in the audience? He said I looked a bit like James Bond today. That made me feel much better, I have to say, even though it's not true, really. He said I always look like James Bond. I'll take that, So I want to give you, and I've got too many slides, so I'm going to really be quite pacey in this presentation because I want to leave some time for Q&A. But what I want to do is talk about the Southwest specifically. And as Lisa says, I want to challenge you all on equity, on how do we help those children from under-resourced backgrounds. Again, I don't use the term disadvantaged pupils anymore. That's something we could talk about later in the session I'm doing with Amy on equity. But I want to do two things. One is to think about the challenges, the specific challenges we face in the Southwest, which is often overlooked, nationally certainly. But also I want to flag up a potential opportunity that we have as a region. The last time I spoke for ResearchEd in London, it was about, I think, at least 10 years ago, I was talking about a thing called the Pupil Premium Toolkit. This was before we created the EEF, and eventually I presented that to the EEF. We gave the EEF this Pupil Premium Toolkit. That became the Teaching and Learning Toolkit that some of you might have seen, I hope. It's been used by 1 million teachers across the world. So that was the last time I spoke at ResearchEd. So I'm hoping that today something equally transformative will come from this. No pressure, Jenny and the organisers. But I think, today I want to talk about the region specifically. I want to start with the story of my life. And those of you who see my lectures, usually I start with a picture of me as a punk when I was 16 and blonde spike hair. This is going back, as I get older, I'm going back further with my life stories. I just wanted to share this because I think for me, personally, it reflects some of the things that I wanted to talk about this morning. And it's about the challenges, but also the opportunities that this place, this beautiful part of the country we're in now. This is me, I think it's age 6 or 7. We used to go to Hale Towns. It was a chalet, I think called Chalet Park. It was like sort of caravan park. I don't know if people know where that is, but honestly, this was our annual holiday. I used to love going this. Every time I come back to Cornwall, I smell that fresh air, and it sort of reminds me of these idyllic 2 weeks we had in the summer. But in those days, it was a challenge getting here. My dad had a Morris Oxford car that was second-hand. Just to get from London to Cornwall, I can tell you, was a challenge in itself. And I always remember the car used to break down often. I used to be back of the seat. And what was interesting was several other people would stop on the way, and there would be this, dads in those days knew how to mend cars. You could do that with cars. But what was really interesting, I think we've lost this a bit. So a lot of my work about social mobility is about actually how individualistic we've become as a society. I'm convinced, despite all the challenges in the 70s, that we were more communal. So that you'd see, and it's a class thing as well, by the way, it's the fact that we were of more working class origins. But I do remember the rain pouring down outside the car, but several people would stop and work together to work that out. So that's a theme I want to come back to, because I think we as a region could work together more to challenge some of the issues that I'm going to show you today. So I'm not going to bore you with the rest of the story, but basically I loved my time at Haleton. I took my children there. It's all gone now. It's so sad. It's like, so there used to be a little train journey you could go around, and it's all sort of I felt so old when we went back there, but I loved my days there. It was also, because we went back there every year, it was the first time a teacher really gave me really good feedback. I did a story about a dolphin that we saved or tried to save, actually. It didn't happen in the end. And I remember that sort of feeling of getting positive feedback from a teacher. So I associate Cornwall with some of the challenges I'm going to talk about, but also some of the wonderful opportunities that we have here. So I use this picture a lot in the work of the South West Social Mobility Commission, which Lisa is a commissioner for, and I'm going to talk a bit about what we've been doing there. So I'm going to show you some of the really challenging statistics about the South West, but what I want to sort of flag up, and this is me, done various things, we'll skip over there, skip over that, but I want to sort of flag up a sort of idea, I suppose, that maybe we as a region should establish our own, what I'm going to call the Southwest Equity Challenge. And I think that would be a challenge in which every school commits to doing certain things, every college, every university as well, because I don't think we're going to be saved by the national policy world, despite having a government that I think is slightly better than the last one. Sorry I don't want to get too political there, but I think they probably respect education a bit more than the previous lot. But I still think as a region we're going to have to address some of these equity issues ourselves. So I'll come on to some of those ideas. I could do a whole hour's lecture on this one slide, by the way, so I apologise for giving you too much information, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the stuff that I bombard Lisa with on commission meetings. These are just some of the societal trends, right, that we face as an education system, and I'm increasingly presenting these sort of data to other governments as well. It's not just England, it's across the world. And the thing that's different for schools at the moment, right, is that we have a world of it's a bit depressing, an era of downward mobility. So we have more people now in society who are doing less well than their parents, right? Lots of measures we use for this, your average earnings, whether you're likely to get a house, you know, all these sort of things. If you're born from 1980 onwards, that red line is whether you've faced downward mobility compared to your parents. We are in an unprecedented era in that there are more people now that are doing less well than their parents did a generation before. And that's leading to all sorts of hardships. And one of the things, and I won't have time to go through it now, but one of the issues I think that I flag up in my equity work is it's not just about the pupil premium children, actually. Disadvantage is much broader than that, and I think we need to challenge ourselves in terms of those. Sometimes I see some quite crude dichotomy between here's the disadvantaged pupils that we're going to call disadvantaged, we do something, and here's the rest that are all right. It's not like that at all. There is a broad spectrum of disadvantage, and if you look at the attendance stats and the absence stats, that's throughout the population. It's not just those poorest children. So the reason I mention this, and this is, by the way, an American, America is not the land of the American dream. There are more people now who are less well off than their parents were. If you're poor and if you're black in America, it's not a world of the American dream. So I present that when I'm doing the international conference, just to make that point as well. By the way, surprise, surprise, the two countries with some of the highest inequalities in societies are the ones where this is most apparent, you know. So if you're going to address social mobility, however, equity, you need to think about child poverty, you need to think about... We can't solve that as a school system, but I think we can up our game in many ways. So this is the sort of societal context. This is the long-term trends for education. This is OECD countries, so I'm going really big picture and then I'm going to come to the Southwest. This is the chances of getting into tertiary education if your mum and dad, or one of them, or both of them, sorry, just left school with very low qualifications. This is sort of defined in the OECD data. So this is all the sort of rich countries, about 28 of them in the world. The thing that's interesting in this graph to me is this is like the birth of those children. And there was some progress in that we were getting more of those people into higher education over those periods, but it's kind of plateaued. And this is across all countries. And what the message I have for policymakers is that, you know, the education system does a really good job of counterbalancing those inequalities outside, but it can't do it all on its own, right? It can't address these issues on its own. So there's a real balancing act here, I think, in challenging ourselves and making sure we have high expectations, but also challenging the policymakers and the government people to say, yes, we can do all this, but you've also got to address things outside the school gates. So coming on to the Southwest, and these are just some of the challenges that me and Lisa talk about a lot, a very detailed map. One of the stark statistics that we presented as part of the Southwest Commission on Social Mobility was higher education participation statistics. it's interesting, and this is again an average across the southwest, and it varies actually by place, very much so within Cornwall, Devon, and Somerset. We're just looking at the peninsula for these statistics. But we found that in London, if you're on free school meals, your likelihood of getting into higher education is actually higher than a pupil here on average. So if you look at the disadvantaged pupils here, it goes down even further. Now, I think this is, when we'll come to some more of the sort of challenging statistics, you've got to be careful with some of this stuff because not everyone needs to go to higher education. And I do think, again, as a region, I think we need to think through some of this stuff. The sort of assumption that you leave to achieve. So the Commission is very much embracing the idea that we're trying to help young people here in this region, not those, and some people will of course go to other universities in other parts of the country, but it's really about children more generally than just that sort of academic route. So we can talk a bit about that, but my work really is about background shouldn't prevent you from doing what you do, whatever you choose to do. And I think there's some really creative, technical skills in the region that maybe we need to think about more than just measuring ourselves by HE. But on HE itself, we come down poorly compared to most other regions. The other thing, and Westminster really doesn't know about this. When you have debates that I'm involved in nationally, it tends to be the north-south divide that dominates the political debates in education. But actually, what we found with the Commission is that if you're, and this is just looking at PP, we only have data on pupil premium students. When you look at those students, we have some of the poorest outcomes in the country. Again, these are data that are for the peninsula, and it varies, and there's bits of Cornwall that do better, there's bits of Cornwall that do less well than this. But on average, we do less well on all those sort of key benchmarks over the school years. So I think there are some profound issues in the southwest. And when we did our first report, and please do look at, they're all online, these reports. The idea of the Commission is to try and challenge ourselves as a region. And it's really interesting. Other regions like the Northeast have been in touch with us about maybe they want to do a similar sort of thing. They feel like they're, again, being overlooked in terms of national policy. And there were some really common issues, actually, when we spoke to those in the Northeast. But these were sort of some of the underlying issues that we uncovered when we spoke to people across the region. And you'll all be aware of some of these issues, particularly when you get down to Cornwall, the idea of disconnected areas, transport, just getting to college or university, those, and internet connectivity as well was particular. These were particular issues over and above the sort of the literature around inequalities more generally. You'll all know about this, the low wage economy that we have in the southwest, and I think if Labour is really serious about its opportunity mission, then we've got to think about actually more jobs in this part of the world, as well as improving our education systems. And there was also this, and we were a bit nervous about saying this, but there seemed to be a sort of lack of impetus for change. It was partly because it's a beautiful part of the world. People come here to have a better life-work balance, The political situation here, it always seems quite fractious to me. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but where some parts of the country you have a united sort of mayor around Manchester, for example, right? You have a figurehead that really sort of champions that part of the country. Here, I think we lack, and that's one of the ideas of the Commission. How could we come to sort of represent ourselves more clearly in those Westminster debates? You'll all know also that the funding in the southwest, people always remind me of this, that school funding is lower than other bits of the country. And again, maybe we need to think about a campaign to really push on that with those in Westminster. So these are sort of some of the challenges. And the other sort of general trends that I'm finding is, because I study social mobility. So basically what we're doing is we're looking at generational trends. We look at children, their parents, their grandparents, and what impact that has on education prospects. What we're finding is that many of those families that, for whatever reason, are questioning the value of schooling, often come from families where their parents and grandparents also had a negative experience of schooling. So I think we need to think, and again, I won't have time in this session to go through this, but some of the equity work that I do with schools is about how we reconnect with parents in a non-deficit way, in a much more sort of relational partnership approach. I think these things are quite new. I think we are facing profound challenges as a school system. So this is more than just the southwest. This is more universal. you'll all be aware that there are these crises, and increasingly I'm being asked to talk in other countries. It's not just us about belonging to, and I think these are driven by these sort of long-term trends. So I think we need a new approach, and the approach that I've been advocating is called the equity approach. Amy and I will do a bit of a deep dive on that later. But just to sort of flag up, and then I'm probably going to run out of time, aren't I? We're at 20 past. So next 5 minutes, I just want to flag up some of the ideas, some of the work we've done with the Commission, and this idea of maybe we as a region, and I'm trying to think who would help us do this, maybe the Commission, maybe we talk to local authorities, we talk to schools, and we set ourselves a challenge. I don't know if people probably are too young enough to remember the London Challenge. Do you remember the London Challenge, everyone? There's lots of debates about why that worked, and a lot of it was around the changing demographics of London. There was a more aspirant immigrant sort of population that were coming into schools, and I was a school governor in London at the time. But I think there were some really interesting things the London Challenge did. It got schools to challenge each other. There was a kind of focused campaign, if you like. It was over several years. I wonder if we could do something similar. This is just an idea. I'm not talking to anyone in power or control over us, but maybe we do it ourselves, because I do think we need a new approach. I think we need a reset. And so I've just sort of, this is just literally me this week thinking about what would I do if I was in charge. But I think, sorry, that's the wrong term, in charge. I think it's about us doing this, not someone telling us to do it. But maybe we could all commit to do a number of things. And I want to share with you some of the things that we've been thinking about already that could feed into this. One of the things we're doing with the Commission, we were trying to get employers to think about social mobility seriously. So how do you recruit people from different socioeconomic backgrounds? What are you doing for your community? And one of the ideas, we haven't discussed this, Lisa, yet with the commissioners, but one of the ideas was that we, as a commission, could give them a kind of charter mark if they were doing an X number of things. And I wonder, maybe we could think about whether we do this with trusts. Some trusts are always doing a lot of these things, right? But maybe others could up their game in this space. So maybe, is there something we could do that would feed it? And a lot of this stuff is feeding into some of the national debates, but I think as a region, we need to do this ourselves in many ways. I've put me up as one of the superpowers of the Southwest here. So, but I think there is a lot of good things about the Southwest, right? I don't know if people, I'm part of this disadvantaged network with Dan, and I don't know if people are members of that. It's an amazing network of school teachers, leaders, and we kind of get presentations on disadvantage. That doesn't happen in other parts of the country at the moment. So we have got some really good networks in the Southwest. I think there's some really good stuff happening in leadership. And I think the other thing we found with the Commission work when we did those reports, that there was a huge appetite in the region to do something. I really think there's a lot of energy and appetite to do something. There is a high percentage of trust, and I think we need to think about how do we involve all our schools in something that maybe is a sort of regional approach to addressing equity. Listen, as ever, I put too much up on here, and I can share the slides afterwards, but I was just trying to list all the things that we have as a region. And there is so much, but I think we're also at a scale where everyone kind of knows everyone to some extent, right? So when you're in the national debates, and Lisa will know this as well, it's so big that I think it almost gets too theoretical, right? You get these big national policies, you don't really know what's happening in the northeast or the southwest. I think we've got enough to make something happen, but that we are small enough that we could hold each other to account. So that's the argument. We're at a time when there is a huge change as well. We're going to have a new Ofsted framework next year. If Sir Martin Oliver gets, that's definitely going to happen from September 2022. I am talking to him about how we change Ofsted to be fairer to schools working in challenging circumstances, by the way. We've got new MPs across the region, and there is this sort of new government. We're still sort of seeing where that's going to play out. But I think there are real opportunities for us. This is the National Social Mobility Commission was saying that often national policy fails to account for regional differences, and I couldn't agree more. I think we need a more regional approach to these policies. I often get asked to talk to the Welsh and Scots, and when you look at the scale of Wales and Scotland, it's actually similar to the region that we are in. And I wonder whether that's a more sort of doable scale. This is the commission that Lisa sits on. We've got the Great and Good from the Southwest. This has been going for about a year and a half now. part of it is advocacy, trying to say to central government, yes, please look at the Southwest as well. And we're doing some amazing work in terms of trying to come up with some ideas to help address these inequities that you saw earlier. But I think we could build on what the Commission is doing to maybe have this sort of overall regional approach. So a couple of things we're doing that I thought could be part of this approach. One thing we're developing is an equity self-assessment tool. So this is something that looks at how well a trust or a school is doing in terms of, again, we're using pupil premium students because that's the only data we've got, by the way, but I think you'd probably want to look at all your students, as I was saying earlier, across the spectrum of disadvantage. But essentially, we're going to move to a scorecard system from 2025. This is the Ofsted, the new world, the brave new world of Ofsted. There's going to be loads of new data around schools. The tension will be almost too much data. We're going to go from those terrible single word judgments to a world of lots of words and data, and it's going to be a real balancing act. What we've been developing is a specific sort of tool around equity. Again, I won't have time to go through this in detail, but I wonder whether, again, as a region, maybe we could use this scorecard before Ofsted take on some of it more nationally. And basically what it does is, it's pretty obvious stuff, but basically what we would look at is how inclusive is a trust or school? Are you taking your fair share of children in terms of the local community makeup around you? Or how are those children doing? We've been in this weird world under the sort of Govian universe where we almost don't even talk about disadvantage, as if talking about disadvantage will immediately lower your expectations. I think we need to be much more explicit about it and measure schools in a fair way and how they are doing in terms of their children. This would be a combination of data, but also parent and pupil and teacher survey work. We're going to move to a world where we have these sort of scorecards, but we've already piloted one that, and we would like schools to actually sign up to maybe look at this scorecard that we have developed. Another thing we're doing is looking at community hubs, career to cradle sort of models. Again, I could do a whole session on this, just one thing. And I know, Lisa, you've done a bit of this, haven't you, with Kel, in terms of...
We're completely signed up to Cradle to Career.
So I think there's some really interesting work about schools acting as community anchors. The tension there, one of the tensions for me is we have to be careful in having the teaching and learning, the classrooms have to be good classrooms before you start going into the wider community work. I've seen in other parts of the country some schools that are so excited by this community work that actually, if you look at the teaching and learning, it can be a bit of a, you've got to have your teaching and learning sorted out, your core, before you start doing some of this stuff. Anyway, lots of detail in this. I think it's really interesting work. It's partly because no one else is picking up the pieces. So often around the country, you'll see now food banks by schools, and then the schools are being really clever in the way that they are working with parents around that food bank. It's not about academic stuff, by the way. It's about relational stuff. It's about relationships with those parents. So one of the things we could do maybe is think about how we look at best practice around this as a region. We don't all have to do the same model. The other thing I was saying to everyone, we got an award for this in Exeter this week. At Exeter University, we use undergraduates to tutor, to help writing, basic writing for 12-year-olds in local schools. The undergrads get a credit towards their degree. They're not paid for this. The pupils have done better in the early pilots, and some of those undergraduates end up going into teaching. So we call it the win-win-win program. It's interesting. Some of the undergraduates realise that teaching is not for them. I think that's equally good, because what we don't want is people coming in and realising it's not for them too late. So anyway, there's a whole model here. We were just talking with Lisa and I earlier about how could we do this here as well, because it's all right doing it in the Exeter area, but how could we do that as a region? Maybe every college and university could commit to, and I think every undergraduate, by the way, should give back to society. I think as part of our education system, we should have, I'm having an argument with the university, but I think it should be mandatory. You should do something. It could be tutoring, it could be another thing. Of course, the university is saying, oh, it has to be voluntarily. I would make it mandatory, again, if I was in charge. Some of you will have know about the book. I'm doing lots of sessions on equity. I'd love to do more in Cornwall on this, actually. I'm being asked to talk about this around the country. Amy and I will do a bit of a deep dive on some of the ideas in the book. Again, I wonder whether we, as a region, could do more around maybe developing a sort of equity module that every trainee or early career teacher should do. You'll all know about the early sort of framework that we have. I get asked randomly by trusts across the country to do sessions, and I'm like thinking, well, actually, could we do this a bit more systematically? And I love doing all these lectures, but maybe we need a sort of format that other people could deliver as well, so that every teacher is prepared for these issues when they're in the profession, and they get the support that they need. I'm not going to have time to go through all this, but basically there's sort of 3 strands to the equity approach, and we'll go into this a bit later in our session. More than poor, this is really about language and not falling into deficit approaches for our children from under-resourced backgrounds. More than grades is that there's much more to human talent than academic grades. I hope we're going to move to a new system with a curriculum review. No pressure, Becky Francis, but who I'm talking to next week, actually. And more than schools is that point about you can't address these issues without thinking about child poverty outside the school gates. Loads of stuff in this, right? And we're going to talk a bit about the pedagogy of equity with Amy later in the day. But my point here is, again, maybe that could be one of these things. So I've called this the Southwest Equity Challenge. I hope this grabs your attention. I hope people would be up for this. But maybe there's a discussion about what every school could commit to. And we would do this as a region, right? We would do this and somehow we would get everyone to commit to this, and maybe we would have a charter mark for those trusted schools that have committed to it. And these are just some of the ideas that I had for that. So let the discussion begin. I think it's a time of opportunity as well as challenge. I think I've got about 5 minutes left. Oh God, I've got 1 minute left for questions. This is what politicians do, isn't it? But maybe, I don't know if anyone's got any comments or feedback. I'll say thank you anyway. Thanks very much.